Hey there, estate planning attorney Paul Rabalais here, and in this video we're going to talk about how someone or a married couple can provide for the best education for their children or perhaps even for their grandchildren, and also as a side benefit gain asset or lawsuit protection. All right, so little warning, this strategy isn't necessarily for everybody. It's for those who have been fortunate to have accumulated some resources and they want to make sure that their family is taken care of. Let me give you a little example. So let's say you've got a husband and wife. Let's say they're 35 years old. Let's say they have been, successful in business. They have accumulated some resources, and maybe it's because they were successful in business. Maybe they received an inheritance, who knows? But they were able to accumulate so far, a few $1 million. Let's call it somewhere between maybe, $5 to $8 million of assets that they have accumulated. So they're really kind of in that upper echelon there. Not at the highest level, but certainly above middle class. They have 4 children. And one of their primary kind of life objectives, they have 4 kids, is they want to make sure their children get a really spectacular education. It's kind of one of the most important things to that married couple. And quite frankly, with the husband's business, he has had to take some risks. He's had to personally guarantee many risky projects. And so he's risking that if one, business deal goes south, then he and his wife could lose everything that was, personally in their name. So what he decides to do is he decides to set up some education trusts for each of his children and take a portion of what he has accumulated and sock it away in those educational trusts for his children. So let's go through and, dig or dive, deep into that. So what is he thinking in his mind? He's thinking, okay, my kids are very young. He's thinking, okay, Paul, I want to make sure that my children get a great education. I've got 4 kids. I want to set aside the money that I need to set aside that will cover their kindergarten through 12th grade education at, at least, the finest schools, private schools in our area, because our public schools are a joke. And I want to make sure that their college and graduate school expenses are covered. Maybe he's thinking his kids are like my kids. My oldest 2, 4 years of undergrad, 3 years of law school. My 3rd child, 4 years of undergrad, starting his 3rd year at Tulane Law School, last month. So 7 years of college and grad school. And maybe he's kind of done the math and figured K through 12, that's about $20,000 a year per child. And college and graduate school, I want to send them to a good school. I want to make sure they get a really good education. Let's call that $50,000 a year for each child. So he does the math. He realizes for each child he has to set aside $610,000 times 4, $2.44 million he has to set aside. He could keep all of that money in his name, but it bothers the heck out of him because he's personally guaranteed a lot of these risky business dealings, and if one goes bad, he loses everything, including the $2.44 million that he wants to set aside for his children's education. So he decides to set up a trust for each of his children, and it's one of these what's called irrevocable Crummey trusts. But it's, the trust instrument provides that the funds are to be used for the education of the children. More on that later. And so he sets up those trusts. He transfers $610,000 to each of those 4 trusts. It's set aside. It's in a trust for the kids. And now he's starting to feel really good. Now, let's talk about some of the consequences of what he just did. Let's talk about the gift and estate tax consequences of what he did. He and his wife, if you do the math and realize that they can each give $15,000 to put in a Crummey trust each year, for their kids. He and his wife, in that one big shot, they each used $1.16 million of their $11.58 million estate tax exemption that each of them, currently has. No problem, he says. I know my children are going to be educated. I don't have any problem using a portion of me and my wife's estate tax exemption. And then moving forward, what he might do is he may just, if things go good, he works hard, his wife works hard, their business is successful, they continue accumulating, He may just pay those tuition expenses out of his own pocket in the future and let those funds in his children's trust just kind of sit there and continue to appreciate. Because under the gift and estate tax regulations, he can continue to make tuition payments, for his children or for anyone for that matter, without using up any of he and his wife's estate tax exemption. So if things go well, he'll continue to allow those funds to sit in those children's trusts while he pays the tuition expenses for he and his wife's children out of his pocket. And so why would he do that? Well, why wouldn't he just use the funds in the trust? That's what they're there for. Well, he also has a secondary goal with these trusts, not only to provide for his children's education, but he also wants to try to protect as much as he can, just in case he and his wife are personally liable for one of these business dealings, or if they get in a car accident, or who knows, with all the lawyers out there suing everybody every day for anything. He's worried about one day he might get sued because he has some kind of deep pockets and he wants to try to protect what he can. So what he realizes now is, in addition to providing that, knowing that his children's future education is covered, he also now realizes that he and his wife's personal assets, everything that remains in he and his wife's name, only his personal assets are at risk for creditors of he and his wife in the future. The assets that he has already put in these trusts for her kids, for their kids, they cannot be used to satisfy he and his wife's debts. So there's some lawsuit asset protection there. And quite frankly, as his children get older, as they start driving, as they become young adults, who knows if they do something stupid, as long as these assets remain in this spendthrift trust, that I'll call it, for the children, Irrevocable, Crummey, spendthrift trust, all of those things put together, then even if the kids have creditors or have financial problems or incur some debt in the future, these assets, as long as they remain in that trust, they cannot have to be forced to be used to satisfy creditors of the children as well. So there's some careful determination as far as how long this trust will last. So there was discussion about, well, should we just give them what's in there when they graduate from college or graduate from grad school or finish their education? Should we say they get what's left in their trust when they're 25? Should we give them what's left in their trust in stages at 25, 30, and 35? But what he settled on was, because he had a great line of trustees and successor trustees, because these trusts will last for another 20 or 30 years. His kids are very young right now. He decided to allow these trusts to continue until the trustee determines that it's appropriate to terminate the trust and transfer the trust assets out of the trust to his children. And again, that's going to be many, many years down in the future. But it may be appropriate for assets to remain in trust pending the children's future maturity, responsibility, potential for creditors, all that kind of thing, marriages and spouses and all of that. So if you have been fortunate enough to accumulate some considerable resources, and perhaps you have children or even grandchildren that one of your kind of life goals is to provide for their education, and you want the peace of mind that comes from knowing that their education, kindergarten through grad school, is flat out taken care of, and you want to add a dose of asset protection, lawsuit protection to that, then perhaps you'll want to consider a strategy like we discussed here in this video. Okay, hope that helps. Make sure, really important, smash the like button. Also, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to make sure you don't miss anything. I'm continue to crank out these estate planning educational videos like no other on the internet. We'll see you next time. Y'all have a great day.